This special episode of the Renewable Energy Smart Pod, focused on RE+, is brought to you by KPMG. This year, KPMG canvassed hundreds of U.S. executives across the renewable energy industry and found that industry momentum is being fueled by three key factors: demand, innovation, and incentives. Visit kpmg.com/US to explore the detailed survey results, or just click on the link in today's show notes. What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Renewable Energy Smart Pod. I'm your host, Sean McMahon, and this week we're bringing you insights from RE+, which is a massive gathering for the entire renewable energy industry. The conference is taking place this week in Anaheim, California, so I've invited guests who are at the show to join me on this podcast to discuss the hottest topics from the event. Joining me right now is Ryan Pfaff, the Executive Vice President of Grid and Distribution Scale Power at EDF Renewables. Ryan, how you doing today?
Hi, Sean. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here with you from beautiful Anaheim, where the weather is very nice today, following a few very hot, sweltering days, but we're back down to kind of normal Southern California weather for all of the attendees here.
Yeah, more of that miserable Southern California weather, I'm sure. So tell me, what's the vibe like at this year's RE+?
So thrilled to be here, and I should give you a disclaimer up front that I'm also on the board of the RE Plus events entity itself, so I'm fairly involved with the organization and can't say enough about what a great organization it is, which has grown from being focused around a single event, which was Solar Power International, to the rebranding into RE Plus, and also the expansion into a number of regional events over the years. I think we're at 8 or 9 events now, including RE Plus, a lot of regional events around the United States, and also partnerships internationally as well. I heard we were at about 40,000 people this year, again, so similar size to last year. And there's a high level of energy and activity, and it makes sense. Renewables are very active right now. And, they're active for the reason that renewables are in demand, but also something that is, new in the last year or two is that for the first time in a long time, we have really massive load growth in demand across the United States. And in areas where growth was 1% to 2% for decades, suddenly you have large utilities recognizing that they have like a 10, 15% increase in demand. And that means the demand for what the attendees at this conference provide, which is new generating capacity of all types, is greater than ever. And the product is needed, the service is needed. And so it's nice to be in a business where there's a lot of demand for what you can provide. Yeah, so a lot of energy, a lot of old faces and contacts that are here, and it's great to see them, but a lot of new people as well who are, interested in getting into this sector and have decided to come to RE Plus to kick the tires on it and learn a little bit more.
Okay, and what are they all talking about? I'm really curious to kind of pick your brain. What are the hottest topics so far this week?
So I think one is, even though I just mentioned it, it's worth repeating twice. The fact that this growth in demand is there for a lot of reasons, manufacturing coming back to the U.S., but also the growth in the need for computing capacity based on AI and associated data centers now means that even more of what this industry does is needed. There's an element of meeting climate objectives and cleaning up the power system itself, but now there's just a raw need for more energy, and you hear a lot of people talk about this. So that creates some excitement because it's going beyond goals related to climate, which are essential to, we just need more of this. How can we get more sooner? So getting it sooner is a challenge because it takes a long time to get these projects built and connected. There are still some supply chain challenges that are more often than not pushing projects out in time, not pulling them in. Yet what the system needs is projects sooner, not later. So there's a lot of talk about how can we accelerate things. The other big topic I would mention is that all of the jobs coming up about as a result of the IRA. So with the IRA, for the first time ever, we have a long runway of support for clean energy. In the past, you had, some of the main federal incentives would expire, get renewed for a year or two, expire, and then you suddenly have a 10 plus year runway. And what that has enabled, partly because of the length of that runway, but also provisions embedded in the Inflation Reduction Act, which were intended to spur the development of a U.S. workforce to support the build out and also U.S. manufacturing based on manufacturing incentives. It creates a lot of buzz around big job growth in the U.S. A lot of it union. It's not all union, union and non-union, depends on the area you're in and the union presence. But these are good paying jobs. They're jobs in careers where people can get in and expect to be in that line of work for a long time, like at least into the 2030s and beyond. That's on the job growth side. And then the other thing is manufacturing. So I don't have the exact number, and so I don't want to misquote it, but I can tell you that, I've met with manufacturers who have set up 5, 10, 15, in one case, 20 manufacturing facilities in the US based on the support from the Inflation Reduction Act. It's really exciting. It's exciting to be able to point to domestically produced components in the projects. And secondly, the impact of that is very distributed. So it's across a number of states based on logistics. You want to have manufacturing close to large pockets of activity and development. And that means that jobs are hitting all over the US, right? Construction jobs, manufacturing jobs. So there's a lot of talk about that. And then I think that's attracting a lot of people to the industry right now, the potential to actually work in this industry. So that's very exciting. The latest stat I saw was that from the Solar Energy Industries Association was that there were like 263,000 people employed in solar alone at the end of 2023. And I think when you add in the other clean technologies, you're, hundreds of thousands beyond that, probably 500,000 or so. So it's starting to be a major job creator for this country.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely some fascinating topics going on at the show. So I want to circle back to what you mentioned about supply chain a little bit. I imagine a person in your position, you get a lot of questions from potential customers about like, hey, how long is this going to take?
Yeah.
What kind of answers you got to give them on questions like that?
So, it's no surprise, very specific to the situation, the project, the location. One of the things that EDF Renewables has done is we have gone out and entered into multi-year supply agreements on the module side in the case of solar. Also on the tracker front, one of the other components of a PV system for U.S. produced components, and that gives us an ability to know that we've got supply to build these projects. One of the more challenging areas right now in the supply chain is shortage of electrical equipment. So main power transformers and a component called high voltage breakers. Depending on the manufacturer, lead times are out as far as 200 weeks, so 4 years. And so one thing we talk about with entities we're discussing it is the need to make decisions quickly, because the longer you take to reach agreement on wanting to move forward on a project, the longer it takes to start that long lead time. And that's at the extreme end, the 200 weeks. It might be 100, 150, but still you're talking 2 to 4 years. So everybody needs to move quickly because you can't really speed up that long lead on the electrical equipment. Although that's another area where a lot of manufacturing is coming to the U.S. So it does create an opportunity for companies to start building more of that equipment in the U.S., which is another positive thing. The other thing that I should have mentioned earlier, Sean, and I almost can't believe it, maybe I'm blocking it out of my mind, is the other topic on everyone's mind is the election. And, no surprise there. Everyone asks everyone else, what's going to happen? Who do they think is going to win? But if we call it a toss-up, that could have serious implications for the people attending this show in this industry. And, you have different policies between the two presidential candidates. One of the things that I think is most positive about the clean energy industry right now that should appeal to both presidential candidates is the job growth I've mentioned and the distribution of that economic development all across the U.S., because it's not concentrated in left-leaning or right-leaning districts. It's actually all over throughout Republican and Democratic areas. So it's really a rising tide lifts all boats scenario, and I think it's a very positive story that should garner support no matter what happens. Yet, there's no denying that the industry is viewed a little bit differently by the two political parties. And so I think you're also going to see a lot of people trying to develop two types of plans for the next 6 months, depending on who's elected. You could have something where it's a continuation of the status quo and you have a lot of tailwinds behind you and maybe even more ambitious goals. And then the other would be, something that's not quite that, but leaning into the job growth and the fact that utilities around the country need everything we can produce, and they almost don't care what it is, whether it's clean, whether it's fossil, they just need generating capacity. So there's really no logical reason to slow down what we're doing. And hopefully those common sense messages will resonate with whoever ends up in the White House in January.
We'll be right back. This year, KPMG canvassed hundreds of U.S. executives across the renewable energy industry and found that industry momentum is being fueled by three key factors: demand, innovation, and incentives. Visit kpmg.com/US to explore the detailed survey results, or just click on the link in today's show notes. And now back to my conversation with Ryan Pfaff from EDF Renewables. Getting back to RE Plus and what's going on this week. You're very experienced. You've been in the industry a long time. And are there any technologies or issues or companies that, caught your eye or you've noticed this week that are really kind of interesting to someone with your background?
Yeah. So one of the areas that is of interest to me and the industry overall, and I would say it's an emerging area, but at some point it's going to kind of blow wide open and become very real, is the potential to automate parts of what we do. Designing projects, building projects, operating projects. In many of the meetings I've been in, even though it's not the core part of the meeting, there's discussion around, the use of robotics to, assemble projects and potentially even maintain projects in the long run, which could have a cost impact. Hopefully the cost would be lower. It could also keep people safe, could increase the safety on the site by, sending some of the tasks to machines rather than humans, and allow humans to be in jobs where they're more in charge and making decisions and directing things, as opposed to, straining in the 105 degree heat to do difficult things. So I think that's a very interesting trend. And that, I'm touching at a very high level. There are a lot of interesting ideas, and it's hard to know which ones are going to be realizable the soonest, but it does feel like there's real potential there, that it's not science fiction. There's a way to do this more efficiently and also potentially have a lower impact on the environment. There may be ways to do this in a less invasive way in terms of building projects that would potentially require less disturbance of terrain, for example, while doing it faster, while doing it more safely, potentially at a lower cost. So I think that's a very interesting area. And it's an area where, as we go to these events over the years, I expect to see more and more of that becoming real.
So, I had your CFO, Luis Silva, on this show last month, and I asked this question of him, and he very diplomatically redirected me to someone like you. And so here it is. When you think of all the technologies out there, wind, solar, battery, everything across the renewable energy landscape, which technologies are clients and potential clients inquiring about the most? Are you getting, is it all kind of an even pie, or is it a trend where sometimes it's more solar and then there's wind questions, or what does that look like?
I think it's very region specific, depending on the resource in the area. So there are areas where the wind resource is strong and the solar resource is not that strong. there are areas where the opposite is true. So those two examples could be, Canada and the southern U.S., for example. They're kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. I think there is interest in all of it, and there's a need for all of it. And what you tend to find is in a region where one technology is dominant right now, the customers then would like more diversity, right? So in the, if you use California as an example, for years it was a wind market, then solar started, and now you have a lot of solar, so much so that it created the opportunity for storage because you start over-generating solar in the middle of the day. Now you're shifting some of that production to the evening. So if, you asked a lot of customers whether they would prefer wind or solar in California right now, they would probably want wind. If you go to areas where there's been a massive wind build out, those customers might want some solar to diversify. So it's very region specific. One area where I think there is a need and perhaps not a great solution yet, although a lot of concepts out there that are trying to prove themselves out, would be for a longer duration type of storage for renewables. So, many of the solar projects, particularly in the southwestern U.S., are PVS, PV and storage, and they have what's typically becoming a 4-hour storage system attached to the PV to shift some of that generation into non-sunny hours, into the evening. But there's a greater need for systems that have massive amounts of renewables to come up with longer duration storage solutions, 10 hours, 12 hours, perhaps multi-day, perhaps multi-week. And I think there is a general view that, while it's not totally clear what the solution is for that yet, that if that can be developed, it really opens up the potential to do a lot more renewables, and perhaps in areas where you're hitting limits right now in a certain time of the year, because then you could shift that energy to different hours or different parts of the year. So I think that's an interesting area. But, I really feel that in certain parts of the country, almost as much wind, solar, and storage that could be developed, there's a customer for. There just isn't enough, period. I think the challenge has changed a little bit from, which technology to there's a need for all of it and as much as you can deliver. Not everywhere, but certainly in the populated parts of the country.
And then, so I know you mentioned you're kind of on the organizing team for RE Plus, and so I want to ask you to make some bold predictions. When we get together next year, what are the hot topics going to be?
So I saw a stat a little while ago that renewables represented 85% of generation capacity installed in 2023. So I hope it's more of the same, that we're talking about 2024 in the same way, and hopefully 24 is a little bit larger than 23. I think a continuation of some of the themes we talked about earlier, which may not sound like the most exciting themes, but they're critical to the success of this industry, that we've continued to develop out the workforce, and that we have a stream of emerging talent coming in to help us build out this industry over the next 10 years, that manufacturing has continued to come back to the U.S., and that as demand is growing across the country, as we've talked about, that clean energy is increasingly seen as one of the solutions to plug that gap and provide customers what they need.
All right. Well, I certainly hope that comes true. And Ryan, listen, I know this is an extremely busy week for you, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks very much, Sean. It's been a pleasure being here with you.
Well, that's our show for today. But before we get out of here, I want to say one final thank you to the sponsor of today's episode, KPMG. If you like this show, please subscribe or follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, please be sure to share it with your friends and colleagues. The Renewable Energy Smart Pod is brought to you by SmartBrief, a future company.